Good evening, everybody. uh, a paper jam delays us by a few minutes tonight. Of all things, we live in the I don't know 21st century or something like that, and a paper jam is what delays the show. I need my toy, otherwise I just can't function. So we had to get it fixed. But we are ready to go. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is February 9th, 2025. I'm not going to say whether or not I'd like a quiet week in politics or a busy week in politics, because it seems like no matter what I say, things just get so much worse. But tonight, we're starting out with a positive story, because I think we could all use it. A little positivity, a little bit of inspiration, if you will. So we're going to start with this, because this is really, really important. I think it is. Students at 3 Calgary high schools walked out of class on Friday. And they walked out of class to protest the legislation that Danielle Smith and the UCP put in targeting trans kids. They walked out of William Aberhart, Western Canada, and Crescent Heights. And there's some quotes in here that I think are really, really important from the story. We have some friends, classmates, and family members who are just sadly affected by these policies, said Ellie Sweet, an organizer for the rally. So I just want to take a sec. These rallies were organized by youth in high school who care. They cared enough to do this on their own. They cared enough, and it was a good group of them to stand up and say, "Oh, this is some bullshit right here. This is not okay. We do not accept this. We condemn this." And that in and of itself, getting people to show up to protest, let alone organized protest, is no small thing. That's just not. Getting people to engage in that kind of way is very difficult. But I would challenge everybody to think back to your high school days, or if you're still in them, cool too, and think about how miserable high school was. Think about all of the social pressures. Think about all the peer pressures. Think about if you behave different, look different, act different in any way, people came down and they said mean things to you. And so these kids are incredibly, incredibly brave. And everybody should be giving huge props to them. I certainly do. And that's why we wanted to start the show off with this. Friday's walkout to protest legislation concerning Alberta's transgender youth took place on the 1-year anniversary of the last one. So they did this last year too. The quote, "I just generally worry for their well-being and their security at home and in school." And that's a sad reflection of where we are, but that also only underscores how brave these kids are. And that gives me hope. The fact that there are the next generation, if you will, as I make myself sound probably a little bit unnecessarily old, they're already showing up. This is huge. This is fantastic. Another uplifting story, perhaps? I don't know. I guess it probably depends on your perspective. Kaycee Madu is back in the news this week. Now, this comes after he was sanctioned by the Law Society. There was a decision that was going to be rendered, and we got to do some background on the fines and the reprimands. How did we get here? All of this stems back to March of 2021, when the then Justice Minister was pulled over in a playground zone for distracted driving, with the police officer issuing the ticket stating that he saw Madu on his cell phone. From the report that was completed by a judge at then Premier Jason Kenney's request, when the two vehicles were side by side as the truck was passing him, he noted that there was a dark-colored cell phone in the driver's hand. The driver had his left hand at the 9 o'clock position on the steering wheel and was holding the cell phone at approximately the 3 o'clock position. The screen was facing the driver, and the driver's face was to the right and looking down. He was able to observe this for about 3 seconds. But also from the report, he was moderately argumentative. The driver then asked whether the constable knew who he was. The driver said that he was the Minister of Justice and that he would never do anything to break the law. He said that he was the Minister of Justice 3 or 4 times during the discussion at the window. He gave the constable his driver's license, but did not appear to have his insurance documents. So there's a lot going on there. Now, I want to be clear that what I just read there, that is the finding from the judge who did the special inquiry and investigation that Jason Kenney had requested. So I'm not saying that this is maybe relevant for later, but you see what happened was when there was a question of impropriety, the premier said, "Oh, that's not great. I want to get the most credentialed, the most objective judge that I possibly can. That judge will then do an impartial inquiry. He will make decisions and do all of the things." And so he did. Let's get a couple of pictures that we got to share with you real quick. Oh, that's not the picture that we meant to put up. Gosh, let's this one is this picture. I don't know how this made it in here. This picture is a picture of Kaycee Madu cutting the ribbon at the opening of the Alberta surgery group. You can see him there. He's holding the scissors there, cutting the ribbon. Oh, that's quite a picture. Then there's another one got in there. How does this keep happening? This one appears to be a picture of Kaycee Madu when he was called to the inner bar. That's sure wild because you take a look and he's talking about the inner bar and what a big special deal that is for everything in his universe. And hey, who's that standing behind him there? Who is that? That's a picture that appears to be Kaycee Madu standing with none other than the CEO of MHCare. That's Sam Mraiche. Well, golly, that's pretty wild to just have that come out of nowhere like that. What are the odds that would happen? So Kaycee got his reprimand. He did. And there's a couple of things that we got to talk about in regards to the reprimand. So the reprimand was pretty strong. What the reprimand said was, you have failed in your commitment and obligations as a lawyer. The failure is even more egregious given the unique role you were vested with the time of the events, one in which the public was entitled to regard your conduct as that which ought to have set an example. These are not simply words. Your conduct has been found markedly wanting, and this reprimand is intended to convey the strongest possible message to you. So strong words, very strong words from the Law Society there. Kaycee Madu did issue a statement via the Facebook where he said that he disagreed with all of these things here. He said, "Today, the panel of the Law Society, at the conclusion of its sanction hearing, issued a reprimand against me. This will be the first time in the history of this country that an attorney general was investigated, cited, prosecuted, and sanctioned for actions that occurred in the course of its work." Now, I mean, he's not wrong. He continues to maintain his innocence. On March 10th, 2021, 1 minute and 58 seconds into leaving my home for immediate availability at the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, I was stopped by an Edmonton police officer who accused me of distracted driving, being on my phone. I was not on my phone. The phone records, which were provided to all investigators to all stages of this matter, including the Law Society of Alberta hearing, confirmed there was no activity on my phone before the traffic stopped activity to behind, as no phone call in or out, no text in or out of my phone, not even data usage. And he goes on to say that that is why, through his lawyers, he has filed an appeal. So Kaycee's appealing, and he's allowed to do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's part of the process, if you will. But there is one other little piece that's kind of important to highlight as we go through this conversation, and that little piece has to do with the conclusions of the Law Society, the conclusions of the report that was done by the judge that Mr. Kenney had investigate the whole situation. So we'll just throw that up real quick. The conclusions of the report: did Minister Madu interfere with the administration of justice? He did not. That means he was unsuccessful in attempting to interfere in the administration of justice. Here's the big money, though. Did Minister Madu attempt to interfere with the administration of justice? He did. Is there a reasonable perception that Minister Madu interfered with the administration of justice? Yes. So Kaycee Madu is going to do his appeal. The process will do as the process does, but the judge, Judge Kent, was very clear in his ruling. So there's that. Moving on with more. It feels like good news. A little bit of closure, maybe, because we got to talk about this guy. Oh, look at him. He's pointing at his head and he's saying, "Where did all my common sense go?" David Parker. He had a fine week, if you will. David Parker had a series of fines levied against him by Elections Alberta. These, of course, come in the aftermath of the long-winded investigation that was going on that David Parker said he was going to fight for an extended period of time. The 7 fines totaling $112,500 against the political group included, and this is where it gets interesting, accepting contributions from outside Alberta and Canada, circumventing election advertising spending limits, failure to retain all records for a period of 3 years, failure to deposit contributions into appropriate advertising accounts, failure to report gross income from any fundraising function, failure to record aggregate amounts of money solicited from persons in attendance at a meeting of $50 or less, failure to obtain loan from a financial institution, failure to pay expenses from the appropriate advertising account, knowingly made false statements on quarterly financial reports filed with the chief electoral officer. They found that he lied, not just once, but it appears 5 times. He was fined $4,500 for the first count times 3. He was also fined $2,000 for the same thing, and then additionally fined, 4 times. Knowingly made contributions that exceeded the $30,000 aggregate limit. And then Jonathan Heidenbrecht knowingly made a false statement of quarterly financial reports with the chief electoral officer. So David Parker, who is, he's all about the integrity. He's all about the principle. He's all about all of those things. He's personally being fined a total of $7,500 for the 3 violations. Those are the knowingly making false statements on financial reports, and more. Now, Mr. Parker wants everybody to know that the foreign funding wasn't that bad. He claims that when we're talking about the foreign funding, there was one donation that came from an Albertan, but it came from an Albertan's American bank account. And then he claims that there were multiple other smaller donations that were made, but he refunded all of that money when he found out. But when we go back to the first count, it's that he failed to keep records for the minimum 3 years. So there's no way to know for sure. And we also know that he falsified the records 4 times, I think it was, to the elections officer. So there's some honesty questions at play there. There's just so much going on here. But where it gets particularly important is we're going to go back to the Take Back Alberta super secret squirrel chat, because, again, months ago in the run-up to the election, and this doesn't seem to be reflected in any of these fines, and it's unclear as to whether or not there was any investigation into this particular piece. David Parker tweeted out a story from Rachel Emmanuel, now Rachel Parker, his wife, where he said, "Please share, we are making progress on the election tabulation machines." Now, this is a real problem. This is a real problem for a bunch of different reasons. One of those reasons is David Parker's wife was putting out messaging that was in line with Take Back Alberta, that David Parker was boosting through their super secret squirrel chat group. And she was using her position as True North to send all of this out. It's very reasonable to ask if David Parker, through True North, was maybe getting some free advertising, some free political messaging, by nature of the fact that his wife was a content creator. That's what we're going with these days, for True North. So there's that. But there's some things that we could say for sure. Take Back Alberta was certainly foreign funded. To what degree was provable? Well, we know some, not a lot. We know Take Back Alberta was a huge part of getting Smith elected to leadership. And perhaps most importantly, we know that while the organization may be toast, the influence is still very much there. David Parker, February 5th. I mean, the UCP is government. The board is filled with people I recruited into politics. Daniel Smith is premier. The school boards are about to be swept by parental rights activists. Yeah, that's worth the 10K to me. So, very, very clear. It's worth it to Mr. Parker here. I just don't understand why you would do an interview like that. I don't get it, but there he is in his manliness. It's wild that he would brag about that, because it's something that people really should be paying attention to. And it's something that we've been talking about on the show for quite some time. While the entity that is Take Back Alberta may well be gone, we saw in a report this week from the Fifth Estate that the fringe elements, the conspiracy theories that Take Back Alberta fed and utilized and maybe took advantage of some folks might say, those are still very much in effect. There are people who are running for school board positions. We saw that with the Catholic school board here in Calgary, where somebody who's got some fascinating views on women's access to reproductive health care was elected as a Catholic school board trustee in the recent by-election. So make no mistake, just because Take Back Alberta has been taken back behind the woodshed, financially speaking, that doesn't mean that their influence or their intentions have changed in any way. Moving on from there. And this one's, see, we had this whole segment figured out, and then Trump went and did his thing, because of course he did. So we're going to come back to the whole topic of tariffs and Trump at the end of the show. But we got a little bit that we got to talk about first, because this is just frustrating. The Premier of Alberta decided to share some thoughts on how the provinces and Canada should best deal with Trump's tariff threats.
He wants to punish us in the same way he's punishing Mexico, predicated on some sort of pretext around the border when it doesn't exist in the same way. Why don't you want to make that argument at all?
He wants us to recognize that Canada enjoys a very special relationship with the U.S. that no other country in the world enjoys, and just show the respect of taking seriously the fact that they've got people dying and they want it to stop. That's it. We should stop making excuses, stop saying, yeah, but we're not as bad as the other guys. We should just say, yes, we agree, and we're going to take care of our part of the issue so you don't have to worry about us anymore. So that's all I would say, is that what he's observing is that things are a lot worse than they were last time he was in, that things are going in the wrong direction. We've got to reverse that. So I would say no excuses. Let's just work on that. And then hopefully 30 days from now, we'll have made enough progress that we can move on to some of the other issues.
Why are presenting facts, though, excuses? Like the way you're describing it is just accept the way President Trump characterizes things and kind of roll over. I'm not sure Canadians would be comfortable with that.
Well, I'm not comfortable with the fact that over 1,000 people per year die in my province from fentanyl. I'm not comfortable with the fact that cartels are operating in my province. I'm not comfortable with the fact that I'm having to shut down super labs and drug houses. I'm not comfortable with that either. And so I'm not going to downplay the serious tragedy and loss of life in my province because of the Mexican cartels and this poisonous drug that has caused the addiction. So I see it a bit differently, I think, from you, Vashi. I think it's just as serious an issue for me in my province as it is for the Americans in their country, and that we've got to crack down on it, and this is our opportunity.
So you don't see any value in, and I'm not saying dismissive, like I'm not saying be dismissive. I don't think Canadians want to be dismissive of the fentanyl crisis, which is a crisis on this side of the border as well. But the idea that President Trump is describing, what comes into the United States as responsible for the numbers that he's put out there, like, again, the facts don't bear that out. Why are you unwilling to concede that?
Well, because we haven't done the analysis yet. Let's examine every package. Let's examine everything, every container coming into our ports. Let's examine every truck coming and going in our country. And then we would be able to say, okay, we feel confident that it's not us.
Now, there is so much to unpack there. Again, the Daniel Smith leans into the rhetoric about, well, Donald Trump he's angry about the fentanyl. Oh, he's so angry about the fentanyl. Don't you want to? I don't want to see people die, Vashti. Why do you want to see people die? Very bad faith argument. And then she talks about the cartels operating in Alberta, which is news and strange when you actually think about it, because as has been well established, the reality is when it comes to fentanyl production, the vast majority of fentanyl production, the vast majority of the fentanyl production that causes the loss of life that we see in Alberta and in Canada is domestic. It's being produced here. So it's not that the cartels are sneaking bottles of fentanyl over the border. That's not what's happening at all. But that's apparently something that Daniel Smith is willing to just ignore in order to concede reality to Donald Trump. And again, let's be clear, when we're talking about border security, the issues that Donald Trump are raising are infinitesimally small as compared to issues at other borders and certainly other issues that exist. It has been well acknowledged that the biggest reason why Donald Trump has gone ahead and you said, oh, the border, worst border ever, we got to do something about the border, is because he needs to do that in order to get the special powers. He has to declare that emergency in order to be able to get his tariffs. And he wants the tariffs. And he wants the tariffs for two reasons. One of the reasons that he's been very clear about him wanting the tariffs is because it's going to be a great way to raise a whole lot of money. But there's another reason that he wants to raise those tariffs. We're going to talk about that in a sec. But before we leave this clip behind, we got to talk about this, again, notion that somehow there's a way to search every package, every container, every truck that comes through our borders. Anybody who's making that argument truly doesn't understand the scale of what we're talking about when we're talking about shipping. Here's a picture of just one boat in the port of Vancouver. And if you look closely at that picture, you'll see the containers are stacked many a container high. They're not just laid flat out and that's it. The whole reason why shipping containers are built the way they are is because they're like Lego blocks. They're stackable. And when we talk about how shipping containers are stored on the docks as they await shipment to their next destination, they're not stored laid flat out. This is a picture of the brand new port expansion that was done in the Port of Vancouver. The newly expanded terminal can now handle 1.5 million 20-foot containers a year. It's called a TEU, compared to the 900,000 that they previously dealt with. It adds adding only 15% to the terminal's overall footprint. Now you have to wonder, wow, if they're able to add that much more shipping containers and they're only adding a 15% footprint, wow, that seems like it's because they're stacking them. And when you take a look at the picture, you can see that they're stacking them very, very high, and they're stacking them end to end. So it's not like you can just crack open a shipping container, take a look in, and call it a day. In fact, when we're talking about what it takes to search a shipping container, we're going to go to the CBSA, the Canadian Border Service Agency, and we're going to go to an actual shipping company. So the CBSA makes it very, very clear that they will strive to conduct a marine container examination within 24 hours. That 24-hour period includes the time for the CBSA to perform a physical examination of the goods contained within a marine container located at one of the container examination facilities in Prince Rupert, Vancouver, Montreal, or Halifax. The time will be calculated from the moment the CBSA begins the examination until the examination is complete, and the goods are made available for warehouse workers to reload the container. Note the standard service does not include weekends or holidays, fumigant testing, or ventilation procedures, container reloading times, and containers that are resultant for contraband. So to be clear, when the CBSA says we're going to try to do a search in 24 hours, they're talking about that 24-hour period starts after the container has already been moved from one of those places, one of those stacks. It's been moved from there to a warehouse, because you can't just rip open a container on a dock. A, there's this thing called inclement weather, and B, there's nowhere to do it. especially not one container at a time as each container works its way through. That time frame, that 24-hour time frame, also does not include the unloading of the container and the reloading of the container and then the returning of the container back to the shipping yard. So it's a whole great big process to do a manual search of a shipping container. So much so, going back to the shipping company, they say that an intensive exam, which is the type of exam that Danielle Smith is talking about, where we open every shipping container and take a look, this is the most intensive exam. It is the most significant exam and it requires the entire container to be trucked to an off-port customs exam site where the container is stripped. CES personnel unload the container, segregate designated boxes, and ready the goods for examination by a customs officer. This process can take 5 to 7 days and even longer if the port or exam site gets backed up. So, let's be crystal clear what we're talking about. If Danielle Smith wants to open every single container at the border, you're talking about a 5 to 7 day process for every single container that goes through each port. And again, 1.5 million a year go through just the Port of Vancouver. The amount of personnel that would be required in order to do those searches would be staggering. The delay that you would see when it comes to different types of things that go through the border, like foodstuffs and produce, all of those things that come with an expiry date, 5 to 7 days can make a really big difference. So the notion that we could somehow just magically start searching every shipping container is, again, another example of Danielle Smith spitballing an idea because it sounds good in her head without actually taking a look at the actual logistics. And the problem with that is Donald Trump is a president who, as we learned this week, has some very clear alternative motives. Justin Trudeau had a hot mic moment. For anybody who's unfamiliar, we're going to play the clip in just a sec. But he was at the Canada-U.S. Economic Summit in Toronto. And he said very, very clearly that the U.S. President Donald Trump's threat to annex Canada is a real thing motivated by his desire to tap into the country's critical minerals. Here's the quote. Mr. Trump has it in mind. It's the easiest thing to do, that the easiest way to do it is absorbing our country. And it is a real thing.
The media to please, but Mr. Trump has it in mind that one of the easiest ways of doing that is absorbing our country. And it is a real thing. In my conversation with him
So there it is. The Prime Minister of Canada, in his conversations with Donald Trump, came away with the very real impression, belief, he was told as much, that Donald Trump wants to annex Canada. Donald Trump has said it multiple times that he wants Canada to be the 51st state. Donald Trump has also made it clear in repeated statements that he doesn't want to do a ground war, but he will do economic warfare. He will use economic force, which is exactly what he's doing with the tariffs. So when Donald Trump is talking about tariffs, he's talking about wanting a tool that will simultaneously raise him money domestically, but will also, in his mind, cripple Canada to the point where we would entertain becoming a 51st state. That is the reality of the situation. The Prime Minister of Canada said so. And let's be frank, Justin Trudeau, he's got lots of money, and he's not going to be Prime Minister for very much longer, so he's got nothing to lose here. If he could go live in, I don't know, France or somewhere, maybe somewhere nice and warm. I don't know. I hear good things about Panama. He's got the resources to do it. So it would be, he's got no fight in this game except for concern for Canada. So when you have the Prime Minister of the country saying, no, this is real, and we know that the only way that Donald Trump can access the tariffs is by inventing a border crisis, for the Premier of Alberta, or any other Premier for that matter, to just cede the ground and say, yeah, you know what, we just got to agree with him because then he'll go away. When he's not going to go away. He wants our minerals. He wants our water. He's said it. The Prime Minister of Canada has said it. For Danielle Smith to continue pursuing the pipe dream of appeasement is simply misplaced. It's not going to work. And it's unfortunate that Danielle Smith can't grasp the reality of the border stuff when it's all just a pretense. And she's giving validity to that pretense. And the end game, Donald Trump's end game, is all so clear. Moving on from there, we got to talk about the prayer breakfast, which is a wild thing to say. I am surprised that we need to talk about the prayer breakfast, but we need to talk about the prayer breakfast because Nathan Neudorf, he said some things this week. He had a press conference to talk about a new advertising campaign. No policy changes, but there's a new advertising campaign, and he was asked about the prayer breakfast.
Last week, I took word of your trip to the prayer and breakfast to the streets of Edmonton, and everybody I talked to said they didn't want to pay for that. They didn't see value in Alberta taxpayers putting in money for a prayer breakfast trip. Can you please respond to that and explain to Albertans why you think this is value for tax dollars?
Yeah, that's a great question and a fair question. This trip has been planned for a long period of time, and I've amalgamated 2 trips into one. With taxpayers in mind, that there are many key stakeholders that I needed to speak to for my file and ministry in Washington, and killing 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak, is the most effective way to do that. The timing, as it happens with the trade relationship being a critical issue, I think makes that more imperative. And I've been in this position to serve Albertans, and Albertans' best interest would be to make sure that these tariffs never come into realization. Everything I can do to help Alberta's position in that, I think I should do. And basically combining 2 trips into one to save taxpayers' dollars is what I've tried to do to alleviate that concern.
So you see, he's just trying to save taxpayers' dollars. It's not like, and we talked about this before, we're going to talk about it again, because that's a minister of the Crown directly and deliberately misleading Albertans. How do we know he's deliberately misleading Albertans? Because again, we got the email that says as much. We received this email back in December, and the email makes it very, very clear. Hi, ministers, MLA schedulers, and friends. I hope this email finds you well. Earlier this fall, Minister Williams was put in contact with the organizers of the U.S. National Prayer Breakfast to seek guidance and input for our own provincial Christian prayer breakfast. In the process of the discussion, he was invited to lead Alberta's delegation to attend the United States National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C., February 5th to 6th, 2025. Minister Williams nominated each of you to be one of Alberta's invitees to this event. Dan Williams, Joseph Schau, Nathan Neudorf, Nathan Cooper, Chantal DeJong, Nolan Dick, Andrew Boychenko, Julia Behrman, Pam Davidson, and Minister Grange would be attending on a separate invitation. So let's be clear. Let's be clear before we get to the rest of the email, which we're going to. Let's be very, very clear. Dan Williams was talking to people because he wants to set up an Alberta Christian prayer breakfast, a mono-faith Christian prayer breakfast organized by government ministers with a model being paid for by taxpayers. Now, I'm sure the Christians out there, some of them are like, well, it sounds like a great idea to me. There's probably some other people who are like, oh, I don't like that. I don't think that my tax dollars should be going towards the religious pursuit of anything. But nonetheless, here we have Dan Williams seeking out input for a Alberta Christian prayer breakfast. But where it gets really telling is the end of the email, because at the end of the email, it says, once attendance and approvals are confirmed. Once we know you're going to go to the breakfast, because the breakfast is the most important thing, you see. Julia Behrman and the DC team will attempt to set up some KMs and recommended meetings during the mission. A priority will be promoting Alberta energy with state representatives. Coordination amongst the delegates would be key. So let's be clear. Number 1 priority. Oh, we're going to go to this breakfast. It's going to be so great. All the Republicans are going to be there. The mega church folks are going to be there. It's going to be so awesome. We're going to feel so religious. Paying again. What was the price? $650 per ticket, as Jesus would have wanted it. so we can learn how to set up our own prayer breakfast here in Alberta. We'll set up some meetings to give it some legitimacy, though. So the fact that the minister in the clip forward was like, oh, I was trying to save the taxpayers money. I put the two meetings to trips together because I was going to go for the prayer breakfast, but then I also had all of these other meetings that I needed to do. And again, hasn't been planned for a spectacularly long time because it's February and this email went out in December. Now, on to the main event. Wednesday. Now, let me just say, for a variety of different reasons, we're going to do a little bit of reading time with Nate because we pulled some of the paragraphs out of the story that dropped Wednesday night, 9:00, Carrie Tait, Globe and Mail. And there's a lot. Oh, there's a lot in there. So we're going to read a few paragraphs and then we're going to add a little bit at the end. It'll be fun. This is why I needed my papers. This is why the jam was so catastrophic. Alberta terminated Athena Menzopoulos as AHS's chief executive on January 8th, replacing her with Andre Tremblay, the deputy minister of health. Miss Menzopoulos, I'm so sorry. In a lengthy letter from her lawyer to AHS, interim general counsel on January 20th, alleges that she was fired because she launched an internal investigation and forensic audit into AHS's contract and procurement processes. Disclaimer, actually, before we go any further. I'm speaking, reading this story, just as myself. I do not claim to speak for any other organization, except for the Breakdown Media. And that's what I have to say there. So, Miss Menzopoulos investigated AHS's relationship and contracts with MHCare, the company that facilitated Alberta's $75 million deal to import generic children's pain medication from Turkey in 2022, and its owner, Sam Mraiche. She also dug into AHS's chartered surgical facilities, CSFs, and their contracts. In her letter, she alleges that she faced pressure to sign new deals for chartered surgical facilities, including an extension for the provider known as Alberta Surgical Group, ASG. Throughout 2024, Menzopoulos had been repeatedly subject to interference and pressure from various government of Alberta officials, including the Premier's then Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, to sign off on commitments for new CSFs and to approve a contract extension for ASG, despite significant concerns within AHS around the true ownership and potential costs of the CSFs, and concern around the significantly increased costs of a proposed new ASG contract. Ms. Menzopoulos' letter said that she prepared a 44-page briefing note outlining her interactions with government and is prepared to sue for wrongful dismissal. Ms. Menzopoulos updated the AHS board on her investigation and audit on December 19th. The AHS board, after Ms. Menzopoulos provided an update on her investigation in December, recommended that she take her findings to the RCMP, the letter alleges. The government dismissed the board January 31st. The investigation also revealed that Jitendra Prasad, who worked in procurement for AHS, had an email account with MHCare during part of the time he worked for the health authority, the letter alleges, including when he was negotiating the contract to buy Turkish pain medication. The letter tied Mr. Smith to Mr. Prasad and alleges that Mr. Prasad appeared, air quotes, to be retained or engaged by people involved with chartered surgical facilities and AHS procurement contracts, while also providing advice and services to Alberta Health and AHS for those same contracts. There's got to be a term for that. Ms. Menzopoulos also alleges that Mr. Smith, the Premier's former Chief of Staff, appeared to make calls on behalf of private surgical organizations. So that's a lot. And one of the big things with this story is the inclusion of Jitendra Prasad, because he's been a bit of a missing piece. If what this report says is true, Jitendra was allegedly using his position within AHS, leveraging for two organizations that we know of. One of those organizations is MHCare and Sam Mraiche, who, yes, is suing us for $6 million for our coverage of this. The other is the Alberta Surgical Group, whose ownership created 4 new companies with the owner of MHCare in October of 2023. It's also worth remembering that Jitendra isn't the only former AHS employee who allegedly has involvement with this whole saga and MHCare. Blaine Iskew is a strategic procurement expert who apparently left AHS in 2022 before immediately getting a role with MHCare, where he has been recently identified as an executive vice president. Blaine is also one of the registered directors for those 4 companies formed with the owners of the Alberta Surgical Group. Now, we're not going to get too far into the weeds on this tonight because we did just rebroadcast our Skybox network episode just on Friday. You can go back and listen to it. You can go back and watch it because we go through all of the details there. But the long and the short of it is both Blaine Iskew and Sam Mraiche formed 4 companies with the owners, some of the owners, the big owners of the Alberta Surgical Group. Now, this is not nothing, and it's not insignificant. Because with all of the allegations that are going on, this raises some very real causes for concern. Because there seems to be a bit of a revolving door that's going around between certain former Alberta Health Services employees and MHCare and Alberta Surgical Group. And the Venn diagram of Alberta Surgical Group and these former employees is pretty tight. Because MHCare, again, is owned and operated by Sam Mraiche. He's one of the members of those 4 companies. Blaine Iskew is a vice president. And if what is alleged in the letter that the Globe and Mail reported on is true, then that means that Jitendra Prasad was also playing both sides against the middle, which is pretty significant. The reaction has been pretty big. Didn't take very, very long for leader of the NDP, Naheed Nenshi, to step forward with some thoughts.
Let me be clear. I've been watching politics for a long time. These are amongst the most shocking allegations that I have ever seen. Danielle Smith's government fired the AHS CEO and then fired the board. She's now on her 5th AHS CEO in the short time she's been premier. She's fired the board twice. We already knew that they didn't know how to manage healthcare. But what this report alleges goes much, much further. The report alleges that this firing happened after the CEO and the board of AHS started to look into the legality around contracts for private surgeries that could enrich companies that had very, very strong ties to the UCP government and staff. They did all of this with your tax dollars. The allegations say that the CEO was pressured into signing contracts way above market value with these companies. The board was so concerned about this that they suggested that the CEO take the information to the RCMP for criminal investigation. The CEO was fired 2 days before a meeting with the Auditor General to talk about what was going on. So this is what I'm calling for today. The Leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition, Christina Gray, will be writing to ask for 3 investigations by the RCMP, by the Auditor General, and by the Ethics Commissioner. And I am calling for a judicial-led public inquiry into this matter.
A judicial-led public inquiry into this matter. Not unlike what Jason Kenney rolled out when Kaycee Madu got a distracted driving ticket. Now, there's no question as the judge concluded, that Kaycee Madu did try to interfere in the administration of justice. There's no question that conclusion was the conclusion that was reached. So it's a pretty serious matter. It pales in comparison to what we're talking about here. So the idea that having a judicial-led inquiry for this situation should be pretty much a no-brainer. But then she had some more things to say, because one of the other key figures that keeps popping up in all of these allegations, which are unproven in a court of law yet, is the Daniel Smith's chief of staff, Marshall Smith, who had some other roles in government before, and who was a key player in the design and architecture of Daniel Smith's Recovery Alberta model. That he was one of the key figures in this. And then she had some thoughts on that.
I wanted to ask you about one of the key figures in the allegations, Marshall Smith. Obviously, he's no longer with government. He was Premier Smith's chief of staff for some time. It's unclear yet whether or not the Premier was aware of his actions. So given that he's gone, to what extent do you think this relates to the Premier?
I've had a lot of chiefs of staff. Okay, two. While I was mayor, and I have people acting in the role of chief of staff in my current role. Here's the thing. The chief of staff only works on their principal's direction. They are the right hand of the mayor or of the premier. So there's only two possibilities here. If these allegations are true, that the premier's chief of staff was putting undue pressure, potentially for personal gain, on the CEO of an arm's length agency. If these allegations are true, then there's only two possible answers here. Number one is the premier knew. If she knew, she has to resign. Number two is she didn't know. If she didn't know what her own right hand was doing, that means she's incompetent, even more so than we thought she was, and she has to resign.
Now, you could love or hate Naheed Nenshi. Makes no difference to me. But he's not wrong. Those are literally the only two options. And to give you an idea of the size and the scope of what we're talking about here, reportedly, the amount of money that MHCare has received in contracts from just Alberta Health Services. So this is assuming that there's been no other contracts with any other place in government, is well over $600 million for contracts going back to 2020 when MHCare started to be a thing at the beginning of the pandemic and started selling PPE, personal protective equipment, masks and gowns and gloves and all of that sort of thing to Alberta Health Services. So the notion that this body that has received over $500 million with the B dollars would somehow not show up on the premier's radar is certainly suspect, especially when she received gifts from that person's accountant of hockey tickets to go to BC. Again, that's not speculation. That's been publicly reported on. So it defies any sort of credibility to suggest that Daniel Smith had no idea what was going on. That's absolutely ludicrous. And it would be, given the fact that she has appeared in pictures, given the fact that her former Justice Minister has appeared in pictures with Mr. Mraiche, it would be such a staggering admission of incompetence to suggest that she had no idea who Mr. Mraiche or what his business relationship was with the Alberta government. And there's some other reasons for that we're going to get to in just a sec from somebody who really, really would know. And then she also appealed to existing UCP MLAs and ministers.
I'm encouraging every single UCP MLA and every single UCP cabinet minister today to take a hard look in the mirror and ask yourself, is this the kind of government you signed up for? When you went door knocking to your neighbors and said, I want to serve, is this what you meant? And if so, it's up to the UCP members themselves to really say whether they stand for clean and uncorrupt government. Simple as that. And so, not my problem to solve of how they'll manage their internal dynamics, but they got a big caucus, and I'm confident that the work of the government can continue. In fact, it can continue better if it's not working under a cloud of allegations of corruption.
And this is critically important. This is a critically important piece because MLAs do swear an oath. MLAs exist to serve the people in their constituencies. Ministers exist to serve the people of Alberta. All of this is just basic. The notion and the reality that we have not seen a single UCP, MLA, or minister to the time of this broadcast step forward and say, you know what? I don't believe these allegations. I don't believe that they're true. I don't believe that Danielle Smith would do this sorts of things. This is a gross and vicious attack. I will not stand for it. I am calling for that. You want that judicial review, Mr. Nenshi? Oh, you've got it, sir, because we're going to prove how wrong this is. This is garbage. We have not had a single UCP, MLA, or minister say that. We have had nothing but resounding silence, with the exception of a single statement from the Premier that, yes, we're going to get to in a bit. And so you really have to wonder what is going on inside of the UCP caucus right now. And you really have to ask yourself what kind of a gut check these people are doing. Because at a certain point, if you believe none of this is true, you've got nothing to lose. If you believe it is true, if you believe there's even a possibility that it could be true, you have a responsibility to your office and to the people of Alberta to demand an impartial and thorough, not rushed investigation. And yet, we still see nothing but silence from the entirety of the UCP caucus. They want to talk about Bitcoin, and they want to talk about pipelines. They want to talk about tariffs. They want to talk about everything except for this seething, cancerous mass that is in the middle and the center of government. The first step in solving any problem is admitting that you have one. And if they're in a position to prove that they don't have a problem, then they should be stepping up to the microphone to do so. But they are failing at even that most basic responsibility. And if you think I'm being too harsh, let's be clear. I'm not the only person. Nenshi, he said some things. I said some things. So did the AMA. The allegations that have been made are serious, and the AMA hopes that the most appropriate parties will be involved in a thorough and independent investigation. The processes and outcomes should be shared with the public. Again, that should be an easy conclusion to come to. The United Nurses of Alberta also issued a statement. The story contains many deeply serious and troubling allegations that demand a timely and formal investigation with a comprehensive report that is open to the public at a time of needless upheaval in Alberta's healthcare system that includes an aggressive program of privatizing activities such as surgical procedures that should remain in the public system. We need to consider the message that sends to frontline employees like you as members and the organization they work for, that the government that is driving their agenda. The Health Sciences Association of Alberta also issued strong condemnation, again, calling for an impartial, complete, and public investigation. And again, if there's nothing wrong, there's no harm in doing the investigation. If there's something wrong, it's critical that that kind of investigation happens. The Auditor General confirmed this week that they have, in fact, started an investigation. And this is where there's some nuance. This is where it's important to know some things. So as of February 6, 2025, the following statement was issued by Auditor General Doug Wiley today. I recently commenced an examination of the procurement and contracting processes at the Department of Health and Alberta Health Services, said Auditor General Doug Wiley. At this time, the examination pertains to chartered surgical facilities, medication, ibuprofen or acetaminophen, so those are the children's Atabay medications, and COVID-19 personal protective equipment. The examination is looking at the effectiveness of management and control processes, including governance and oversight, ensuring value for Albertans while addressing concerns or allegations related to contracting and potential conflicts of interest. If necessary, the examination may extend to other organizations. Results of this work will be made available to all Albertans when the reports are tabled in the Legislative Assembly. This is the nuance. The Auditor General is an officer of the Legislative Assembly. The Office of the Attorney General is independent, nonpartisan of government and those it audits. Its work is mandated in legislation and is not negotiated under contract, ensuring its independence of what it audits and how it reports the results of its work. This ensures the work is objective. The Office of the Auditor General is a credible and trusted source of information on government spending and activities. Now, to be clear, all of that is true. To be additionally clear, the Auditor General is not someone that Danielle Smith can just whimsically fire. That's something that has to happen through a majority vote of the legislature. So the Auditor General is not someone who can be simply made to just go away like, I don't know, maybe a CEO or board. But the Auditor General's powers are limited to reporting. The Auditor General cannot issue any sort of sanctions. The Auditor General cannot do a criminal investigation. And given that, if the report from the Globe and Mail is accurate, if the letter that the Globe and Mail reported is accurate, and the Board of Alberta Health Services referred the former CEO to the RCMP, there is good reason to believe that some folks who operate at a fairly high level had some concerns that there was some sort of criminal malfeasance that was going on. But it will just be from the Auditor General, a report. Now, Adriana Lagrange's office released a statement. This is not from Adriana Lagrange. This is not a press conference. This is a statement that was released to reporter Sean Amato with City News. And unfortunately, it appears that this statement itself starts with what some people might call a lie. The recent personnel and board changes at Alberta Health Services are part of the planned February 1st transition of AHS into a service provider under the newly constituted Acute Care Alberta Agency. As to the allegations made by the outgoing CEO, Alberta Health Services is reviewing them, but the interpretation that her termination was due to AHS's review of certain procurement decisions are false. We understand that AHS has been reviewing these procurement decisions and processes, and that work will continue until it is completed. We also welcome the Auditor General's review into whether AHS procurement practices were properly followed in these matters, and will fully cooperate with that office as they do so. Until these reviews are completed, we will not be commenting any further on this matter, as it is an ongoing AHS human resource issue and a review by an independent officer of the legislature. So, I mean, the claims are, oh, no. It was all the firing. It was all part of the plan. I know we signed a contract with Athana for 4 years, and we violated that contract by firing her super prematurely. But it was all part of the plan the whole time. We just wanted to waste all of that money on a wrongful dismissal suit, I guess. The board was dismissed as part of the plan too, except wait, there's not something that with some sort of an announcement that was publicly released when Andre Tremblay was made the new CEO, president, and deputy minister for Alberta Health Services that directly contradicts that, is there? Of course there is. Because if we go to the statement that was issued, again, publicly, Andre Tremblay was named interim AHS president and CEO this week, a new role he'll perform while still serving as deputy minister of Alberta Health. He takes over from Athana Metsalopoulos, who has been an integral part of the AHS focus efforts through 2024. We get to the end paragraph. The AHS board will be leading recruitment efforts in the coming months to hire a permanent president and CEO. Let me just read that again for the cheap seats. The AHS board, the board that was in place at the time of this announcement, immediately after Athana Metsalopoulos was fired, will be leading recruitment efforts in the coming months to hire a permanent president and CEO. Oh, wait, but we fired them, which was all part of the plan? It gets a little confusing because it's contradictory. Adriana Lagrange's office statement that this was all part of the plan does not square with the announcement that it was going to be the AHS board that found the new permanent president and CEO. It doesn't square with that at all. It's a complete contradiction. And it's certainly yet another reason for Albertans to have profound distrust in the information that they're receiving from their government right now. It also raises very real questions in other areas, because there's no shortage of areas where the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, and the UCP government have made movements and motions that simply do not make any sense. They do not square with the best evidence. Danielle Smith's regressive policies towards gender-affirming care flew in the face of all of the available science. It flew in the face of all of the condemnation from all of the experts with any kind of credibility. She went ahead and did it anyways. People wondered why. Now they have even more reason to wonder why. When we look at the new policies towards the Eastern Slopes and coal, there are many people who are saying, what in the holy hell is going on here? There's no way to safely mine coal in the Eastern Slopes without risks of contamination. And that contamination, especially on certain sites like Grassy Mountain, poses a catastrophic risk to the water supply of southern Alberta. 80% of Albertans have spoken up and said, we do not want this. This is unacceptable. And yet, for reasons that defy explanation, a billionaire coal miner, the richest person in Australia, is being allowed to go ahead with exploratory drilling. And it is in light of these allegations and the available demonstrable facts, it is entirely reasonable for Albertans to take a look at this situation and go, I don't think I trust your judgment on this one. I feel like you might be lying to me some more. And while the stakes with healthcare are among the highest that they can get, when we're talking about the water supply for the entirety of southern Alberta, those stakes feel a little bit higher. Because there's no undoing that. There's no new government that's going to be able to come along to take the selenium out of the water supply. There's no new government that's going to be able to come along and magically stop all of the coal dust blowing off of the mountains in southern Alberta. It's simply not reversible. And it doesn't make any sense. And even the answers that Brian Jean and Rebecca Schultz have tried to provide have been nonsensical. And when you consider, as we have already established, that two of the policy advisors for Rebecca Schultz and Brian Jean are direct relations of, I wish I was making this up again, Sam Mraiche, you have to wonder what is going on here. And it is not unreasonable or irresponsible to ask for clarity on that. And it begs the question, where's Danielle Smith in all of this? Where in the world is Danielle Smith? See, it's an AI image. We asked the AI prompt to do Danielle Smith, like where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Please don't tell Mark Slipinski. He doesn't need to know about this. Let's just go ahead and take that right off the screen. Danielle Smith issued a statement wherein she said some pretty bold things. I've read various media stories containing allegations regarding the procurement and contracting processes of AHS. They are troubling allegations and should be reviewed as quickly as possible. To that end, I will be writing the Auditor General, Doug Wiley, to ask for an expedited review and his findings on this issue. I'm going to pause from the statement here for a sec, because Doug Wiley said 2 days ago that he had already started an investigation. So you have to wonder why Danielle Smith would need to write him to say, hey, you know that investigation that you've already started? Yes, do that, please. The key word here is expedited. She wants it rushed. I've also directed my officials to ensure that any request for information from Mr. Wiley or his office is dealt with on a purely, fully transparent and expedited, again, basis. We need to get to the bottom of this issue quickly to identify any potential wrongdoing, correct it, and address it appropriately. I have also asked that AHS's internal review be completed as quickly as possible and delivered directly to me so that we can study these results and make improvements or adjustments to these processes. Until these findings are delivered, AHS has paused the contracting for the surgical facilities under review. Well, we'll talk about that next week. As Premier, I was not involved in any wrongdoing. Any insinuation to the contrary is false, baseless, and defamatory. And before I finish the sentence, I just want to address that because that is some next level bullshit. Danielle Smith is the Premier of the province. She's the leader of the United Conservative Party. If there is wrongdoing, the buck stops with her. And if even a fraction of what has been reported by the Globe and Mail does have truth to it, to paraphrase what the leader of the opposition said, she is either responsible because she knew about it or she's responsible because she was too incompetent to know about it. Those are the only two choices. And it is not defamatory to suggest that the Premier of the province take responsibility for things that happened under her watch. We've learned here on the show recently, one of the absolute defenses to defamation is the truth. And if any of these things are true, then to say that Premier Smith is responsible is not defamatory. It's accountability. And the fact that her first comment that came 3 days after this story broke, it was radio silence between then and Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. The fact that it was radio silence for that long, and her response is, if you say anything mean about me, I'm going to sue you, is the opposite of accountability. And it gets really clear as we get further on in the statement. It's no secret I've been unhappy with the level and quality of service delivered by AHS and the inability of AHS to deliver quality and timely health care to Albertans. I will continue to relentlessly push forward and make improvements. Although that has required difficult decisions and major change, I do not accept the current results. There is a widespread and deep-seated resistance to change that we must overcome. That is my goal, better health care for all. So let's be clear. Danielle Smith did not call for that independent judicial public review. She did not call for that. She called for the Auditor General, who cannot give her any consequences. She did not call for a referral to the RCMP. She did not ask AHS to hand over anything that demonstrated in any way any sort of criminality. She did none of those things in the statement. She took the safest route for investigation possible for her. She then said, if anybody says anything mean about me, I'm going to sue him. And then she turned around to attack the healthcare system and the people who work in the healthcare system. I need to reiterate again, I'm speaking only for myself here. But it is beyond offensive that this Premier, instead of standing up for the healthcare system, standing up for physicians and nurses and everybody who works in the healthcare system, it is beyond reprehensible that she would instead turn on them and say that the work that they do under intolerable conditions that has seen more practitioners under more areas burn out over recent years, that those people just aren't doing good enough, that they're resistant to change. That is some next level, frankly, embarrassing behavior from somebody who's supposed to be, in theory, providing leadership for the province of Alberta. Danielle Smith removed all of the firewalls that exist between government and the delivery of healthcare in the province of Alberta. She did so very clearly because she wanted to have direct command and control over what happens in the healthcare system. She has done it multiple times. It was one of the very first things that she did when she came into office. For her to say, despite the fact that I changed things so that I could have direct impulse or direct control, that doesn't mean in any way that I should get in any trouble for anything. Rachel Notley, former Premier of Alberta, and again, feel about how Rachel Notley as you will. There's a lot of people who have very real concerns with how Rachel Notley ran the NDP. There's been a lot of allegations about cultural issues inside of the NDP, but she says some things that are pretty indisputable. Three observations regarding the explosive allegations about AHS corruption. And again, it's also worth noting, Rachel Notley's not an MLA anymore. She's not the Premier. She's not the leader of the opposition. She's a private citizen, but she's a private citizen with the experience of being in the Premier's office. Smith's weak claims that she knew nothing are beyond ridiculous. The people who are investigating and or recommending referral to the RCMP were fired by order in council. The Premier chairs the meetings of said council. Number 2, this government is in the midst of tearing apart our healthcare system, setting up new boards consisting of friends and insiders, and inviting in even more private for-profit contractors to deliver our publicly funded healthcare. These most recent allegations are further proof that UCP simply cannot be trusted. It all needs to stop. Number 3, allegations of corruption that involve over $100 million. Internal investigations are not enough. The RCMP must be brought in. She's not wrong. All of that is eminently reasonable. All of that are things that everybody, except for the people who stand the most to lose, are advocating for. And when everybody is saying, no, it's not unreasonable to have a thorough, complete, and fair investigation of this situation, and the only people who are saying, no, we don't need to do that. We can take the quietest road possible. That's pretty telling in and of itself. A couple other things before we round it up. And again, this goes to the positions that Danielle Smith has taken. A little while ago, Dr. Deena Henshaw, who was fired when Danielle Smith first came in, she was hired by the AHS Indigenous Health Team. And then she was removed. And Danielle Smith was asked at a press conference what she thought about that.
I'm hoping that you can comment on allegations of your political interference in the revocation of Dr. Henshaw's position within Alberta Health Services last spring.
So your question is?
Can you confirm the allegations? In his resignation letter to Dr. Cowell, Dr. Mann states that he's reiterated concerns several times that you, the Premier, were reaching down 4 levels into AHS and instructing them to rescind an approved contract. What do you say to that allegation?
Well, I can tell you that I put Dr. Cowell in place to make these decisions. I talked with him on a weekly basis. We talked about staffing decisions a lot. And we have a major restructuring that we're doing in Alberta Health Services as well. So ultimately, it's the official administrator and now the board and the CEO who will make those decisions. And it was the case in this instance too. That the decisions of AHS were made by AHS.
Thank you, Nicole. Did you have a follow-up?
Sorry, it's Shailan. Yes, and I do have a follow-up on that same topic. In that resignation letter, Dr. Mann states that Dr. Cowell said that after speaking directly with you on a phone call on June 1st, he said at a group meeting that the Premier is firm, there can be no hiring of Dr. Henshaw. Can you confirm that you had that phone call on June 1st with Dr. Cowell and you outlined that Dr. Henshaw could not be hired?
Look, as I said, I talked with Dr. Cowell all the time about staffing decisions, and he always made it clear that the decisions by AHS were made by AHS. So for him, in conjunction with his CEO.
Thank you, Shay. Operator, could you put through our next caller, please?
Danielle Smith asked, hey, did you have a hand in the firing or the cancellation of Dr. Deena Henshaw's contract? Well, I can tell you, I can tell you that it's the chief administrator's job. It's the board's job. It's all of these other people's jobs. And Dr. John Cowell was very clear. It was not my place to say any of those things. I can tell you that. Well, I can tell you that we saw a tweet from Dr. Braden Manns this week on February 8th, where he said, I was standing beside Dr. John Cowell when the premier called and told him we had to fire Dina Henshaw. She denied that also. I have zero confidence in her denials. Carrie Tait, keep pushing for the truth. Danielle Smith lies. She lies when it's expedient. She lies when it's convenient. And she lies whenever she's in any kind of trouble. We have seen it time and time again. That's not defamation. That's the truth. Danielle Smith has an established history of dishonesty. And what's really frustrating is that Danielle Smith, on some level, knows. She knows what people are supposed to do.
When I'm wrong or make a mistake, I will look to follow the example of our dear departed friend, Premier Ralph Klein. Admit to it, learn from it, and get back to work. Because that is the Alberta way.
Apparently, that's not the Alberta way. Apparently, the Alberta way is to go for the least intrusive investigation possible and then threaten anybody who suggests that you might bear some semblance of responsibility as the person in charge of government with lawsuits. That's Danielle Smith's Alberta way now. And what's really shocking is how quickly history repeats itself.
Will the Premier agree with me that if this deed indeed did occur, it is not private medicine, it is simply corruption?
It's happened before, it'll happen again. And until people start to stand up and demand that the people who are responsible for these things are held accountable, they will continue to try to get away with it. Danielle Smith apparently won't even be in the province of Alberta for the next week and a half. And this comes at a time when Donald Trump has announced that he will be going ahead with tariffs. Donald Trump announced this afternoon that he's going to be going ahead with steel and aluminum and maybe some other tariffs as well. And where this gets to be patently frustrating is Adam McVicker at the beginning of the week was asking, we're seeing all of these other provinces saying, you know what, buy Canadian. We're seeing all of these other provinces saying, we're directing all of our offices to go through Canadians for procurement. To go through, if you're doing business as a city council, if you're doing business as a provincial government, try to do business with as many Albertan companies as you can. Try to, when you're buying groceries, try to do this. There's provinces that have taken American liquor off of the shelves and put it back in warehouses. Adam McVicker inquired, hey, so Alberta, you've been pretty quiet so far. The response he was given was that U.S. tariffs will be discussed by Cabinet later this week, as per the statement from Danielle Smith's office. The statement was, Cabinet will be meeting later this week to consider actions that could be taken by Alberta's government in response to U.S. tariffs. And so far, those actions, if any, have not been announced public and appear to be limited to going to prayer breakfasts, which, by the way, appears to be have been ineffectual for Canada because Donald Trump is announcing tariffs well in advance of the deadline that he said that he was going to provide. It's almost as if his end game is not the border. It's to keep a manufactured crisis going so he can get his tariffs, so that he can raise his money, so that he can try to put Canada in an economic vice in the hopes of making it the 51st state so he can get access to our fresh water, so he can get access to our minerals, so he can get access to all our oil and gas and everything else. Alberta has not released any recommendations. Period. Danielle Smith is reportedly on holidays again in Panama. At a time when a foreign power is legitimately threatening to take over the country, Danielle Smith has gone on her second vacation in a month. It's mind-blowing. And it shows how much she doesn't actually, it seems to show how much she doesn't actually want the job. She wants the prestige. She wants the access. She wants the camera time. She wants the microphones. But when it comes to taking responsibility for the orderly running of government, that's when she threatens lawsuits. Now, all of that being said, a couple of housekeeping things we got to deal with. First of all, this is not over. In fact, this is far from over. We have said since the beginning of this show, not just this episode, but the whole show, when we do our FOIPs and we come across something that's particularly impactful, I hate that word. When we come across something that's particularly significant, our first response will be reported on to real journalists because, and I really do. There have been a lot of people saying an awfully lot of kind things this week. I maintain we are not journalists. We do far too much editorializing. We use AI pictures of Danielle Smith dressed as Carmen Sandiego. If that becomes the standard for journalism, we're in a lot of trouble here. But we do a lot of research. And we do try to make sure that our commentary is as informed as it can possibly be. We did get a FOIP result back. We have also been forwarded some significant, impactful information. And we can safely say that this story is far from done. Now, I know that there are some folks who want to see the breakdown stop talking about these issues. I can't imagine why. We're not going to stop talking about these issues. We're going to continue to be responsible in how we talk about these issues. We're going to continue to make sure that when we make statements, when we say something's true, it's because it's true. It's because we believe it to be true. And we're going to continue asking questions. Because if we have gotten to a place in the province of Alberta where it becomes somehow unacceptable to ask questions, we're in a lot of trouble. And we are not willing at this show to give up that ground. So we're going to continue doing all of the things that we continue to do. A lot of people have asked, how do we do all the things that we do? Well, really what it comes down to is this. We have a very, very simple formula. One second. We've had people asking, how do you find all this information? How do you find all these things? How do you get these FOIP results? And I want to be clear again, anybody can file a FOIP result on any publicly funded institution. If you want to know something about the government or what the government's up to, you can go to the government website and you can fill out a FOIP request. Anybody can do it. So what do we do here at The Breakdown? Well, really, when you think about it, all that we do is we collect information from as many different sides as of a perspective. We listen to multiple perspectives, and then we synthesize that information, which is, to be clear, absolutely not science, but it can be critical thinking if you do it right. A couple other things I want to address before we close it down for the night, because apparently the Twitter space has crashed within the first couple of minutes. I want to reassure there's so much going on. And I know that there are members, and I spoke about this before, there are members of our audience, a significant number of members of our audience, who either are members of the disabled community or who are have family members, people that they care about, kids, grandparents, siblings, spouses, who are members of the disabled community. And I know that the government has made major changes to AISH. And I know that there's a lot of you that are really, really scared, and there's a lot of you that are really, really angry. And I see the messages saying, when are you guys going to talk about this? We are 100% going to talk about this. I promise you that. We're going to do a deep dive on this. The reality is right now, Alberta politics is moving at a rate that is unprecedented. And we've seen many other political analysts and pundits, people who have qualifications well above anything that we have at the show, political scientists, strategists, you name it, all say that this scandal, this scandal that we've talked about in our episode, that the Globe and Mail is talking about, that the former CEO of Alberta Health Services, Athana Manslopoulos, is talking about, and that we have a FOIP result that we're going to be, please, journalists, it is unprecedented. If even a fraction of what has been publicly talked about by the Globe and Mail is true, this is unprecedented in the history of Canada. For political scandals, there's nothing that comes close. And so that's where what spare attention that we've had has been. But I also want to reiterate, the month of March is going to be where we finally get to pull back the curtain on a project that we've been working on for the better part of 2 months. I've talked about it before on the show. I just want to re-up it again. We have been working on the very deepest of dives that we've ever done in regards to the coal mining situation and the Eastern Slopes. In particular, the Grassy Mountain situation and the impact that mining, even the exploration, the drilling, stands to have on the entirety of southern Alberta, which, make no mistake, has a tremendous impact on all of Alberta. We've been working very, very hard to put that together. We're going to get that out of the way. Hopefully this week it's a little bit quiet so that we can spend some time on the AISH stuff. But I want to be really, 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 really clear. We have limited resources here at the show. We have limited bandwidth, I like to say, and we're just sort of triaging things right now. But that does not mean that the AISH stuff isn't important. It absolutely, absolutely is. And we will not allow this conversation to fall through the cracks. The other reality is that the best way to fix some of these chronic, I would use the word abusive issues, like the way that the Eastern Slopes have been approached, like the disabilities changes that have been made, like the position on gender affirming care. One of the best ways to address that is by holding this government to account, because there's a very real window for change here. And so we want to have these conversations while that window is open. So I'm sorry that we haven't talked about it yet. We're going to get to it, I promise. The coal mining stuff is coming, and that's I think the show for tonight. I think that's what we've got. The Twitter space has crashed. It's been super reliable these last few weeks, but we have some very smart people who are working in the background to try to figure out a way to still do the call-in stuff. So we're working on that. Hopefully we will be able to go back to the open mic space in one way or another. I'm going to vamp for a second, and if anything has anything they want to say, they can throw it into the chat, and we'll go from there. And I'm going to do the plugs. Well, people can throw their comments in the chat real quick. So all of that being said, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can sign up to be one of our supporters at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set your own price. And I got to say, the support that we've seen over the last month and a half, overwhelming. Thank you all so much. We have some fun perks that we're going to be introducing for our Patreon folks this week. We got a freebie. And then we're going to be opening up the door for everybody else next week. So you can sign up for that at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. If you're not into the sort of monthly long-term commitment thing, then you can also send an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca. And then I feel like I might have poked the bear a little bit tonight. So we'll just throw this one up here. It's one of those things, in for a penny, in for a pound. for anybody who's unfamiliar, yes, we are being sued by Sam Mraiche and MHCare for defamation. I maintain wholeheartedly it's a vexatious lawsuit. It's a slap lawsuit purely designed to silence us. We do have a legal team. We have filed our statement of defense. All of this is happening. It's real. You can look it up through the courts if you want to. But it's also all on the GoFundMe page that we've started to cover our legal bills. So if you want to see the statement of claim that Mr. Mraiche filed against us, you can do that at savethebreakdown.ab.ca. If you want to help us put together a bigger war chest, then you can also do that at savethebreakdown.ab.ca. That's what I have there. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody, and I want to reiterate: there's been a lot of kindness that has been directed at the show's way and at my way, particularly over the last week, and it's been really, really wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you for the support, for the kind words. So. Just thanks for that. But I also want to be really, really clear. The real journalists are the ones who are doing the incredibly heavy lifting of protecting our democracy. So I'm talking about people like Carrie Tait, who wrote the article on Athana's letter and Athana's lawsuit. I'm talking about people like Alana Smith, who have been doggedly pursuing this whole debacle for literally years now. I'm talking about people like Charles Russell. We have some amazing journalists in this province and in this country, and I am just so grateful that they exist, and they need our support. They need our amplification. So when you see the stories that come out from these journalists about these issues, amplify them. The other call to action that I'm going to throw in before I show this up or wrap this up is it's so important that people understand what's going on. It's so important that people know what's going on. It really can't be stressed enough. It just can't be. It's that big of a deal. And one of the only ways that people are going to hear about this is by people talking about it. This is a scandal. I take a look at the commentary that people like Dr. Dwayne Bratt has provided, and especially the commentary that Dr. Jared Wesley has provided. This is the perfect storm of a scandal, if you will. I want to read one of Dr. Jared Wesley's tweets before we wrap it up. Allegedly, and this is his summation of the situation, allegedly Smith's staff pressured health officials to prove over $500 million in private healthcare contracts to a businessman who bought them seats in NHL luxury boxes in return for the favor. Then Smith fired a CEO who tried to investigate. Allegedly. It's that simple. This is a story of, if true, this is a story of government corruption that everybody can understand. It can be explained in just a few sentences. And it's critically important that everybody who follows this show, whether you're watching live or whether you're listening to the podcast version or you're watching after the fact, find 3 people this week who don't know about this. Because the only thing that is going to make Daniel Smith, the MLAs that are silent, and make no mistake, in this silence is complicity, is the voices of Albertans. The thing that makes this show able to do what this show does is all of you. All of you have that power, and all of you should use it. And before we go, I don't know if it's going to work. I edited the end to try to make it fit. We'll fit it in if not. But anyways, here's your clip.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
She tends to be pretty trusting. That's it for tonight. Thank you all so much. Have a great week. I mean, I guess we're getting tariffs tomorrow, so that's cool. And maybe we get annexed, and at least Danielle Smith's out of the province for another week. We'll be back on Sunday next week live. And in the meantime and in between time, take care of each other as always and keep the conversation going.